Welcome to What Have We Become? My name is Cheryl and I'm the host of this podcast, where I'll talk about different topics revolving our daily life. And let's get started with today's topic. In today's episode, I'll be talking about the topic of MBTI personality types. So the inspiration for this topic is because I actually watched this Korean variety show recently on YouTube by Mission Impossible, and it's called MBTI in One House. So just to clarify, it's Mission Possible channel. In this show, they gathered 16 types of MBTI personalities, and they stayed in a house together and had a few activities that they participated during the course of the show recording. So that show itself was really interesting to look at because it was a social experiment to see how this categorization of the 16 personality actually stands by when you see real examples of it. So I think to start off, I'll just give a very quick introduction to what MBTI is. I think a lot of people has already heard of it. It's actually the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator. So the test actually attempts to assign 4 categories into every person, and each category has 2 sides to it. And this 4 categories forms a combination of 4 letters, which indicates what is your personality type. The way the test is done is a introspective self-report questionnaire where you are given an option of 1 to 5, whether you agree or you disagree to a certain sentence. And there's different scenarios that you go through. I think the test itself takes about 15 minutes to run through all the questions, and by the end of the questions, the quiz actually assigns you a personality type based on your report and your answers. To elaborate a little bit more about each of the personality, I'll actually be getting into every category in the next couple of segments, but just an overview is that the first segment being introversion versus extroversion, the second being sensing or intuition, third being thinking or feeling, fourth judging or perceiving. So these 4 categories will contribute to the final letters. So I'll move on to the next segment where we'll talk a little bit more about each of the categories. The first category is introversion versus extroversion. So I think this is something that is quite commonly known across most of the society. Are you an introvert or are you an extrovert? So how an introvert and extrovert varies generally is that an introvert is someone who prefers to be alone, is comfortable being alone, and needs alone time to recharge and gain energy. And when they are spending time with people, their energy gets drained out quite fast. Whereas extrovert, the difference would be that they do enjoy being around with people and they can't stand being alone for too long because they gain energy by being around people. Introverts also prefer working alone or in smaller groups, while extroverts are really good at being in a team, in a big group or organization. They're energized by people, they enjoy a variety of conversation, and they're generally more outspoken, whereas introverts are commonly known as more quiet or more reserved. So I think in the next couple of segments, beyond just elaborating what these personality types are, I'll actually talk about myself as well. So for me, my first letter is actually introvert. So I think those who know me would know me as an introvert, alright. Because I definitely know that I feel much better when I get to spend time alone. I do enjoy spending time with my friends, but it still drains energy away from me if I spend prolonged period of time with people. Ultimately, I still need time to spend alone. So I had conversation with a lot of people about this top category. In the test itself, it shows a scale of maybe you are 50% extrovert or maybe 60% introvert. So there's actually not a specific, you're not definitely an I or definitely an E, you have a percentage to it. But based on that percentage, the one that's larger is the one that's assigned to you. So I have a couple of friends where they are getting extrovert, but they actually have traits of introvert as well. Means that they do enjoy spending time with friends majority of the time, but they do see that occasionally they do need some alone time. And another thing that I also notice is there are some people where you see that they appear to be extroverts, but when you answer the questions of the questionnaire, they actually come up with the answer of an introvert. That's because they actually have sort of an outer perspective, where outer behavior that they have around people, where they look like they're very happy, they look like they are very excited, but at the same time it's true that it's them, but there is sort of like a barrier between what that is and their true self. So they actually might be introvert by nature, but because of the environment they are at, they are appearing more extroverted. So that's something that I noticed between the I and the E. For myself personally, I'm a very strong I. I'm definitely enjoy being alone, but there's still a small percentage of E with me. So that's a portion of me where I do enjoy hanging out with my friends, but the dominant one is definitely introvert for me. So that's the first letter. And bring back to the example of the show, the MBTI YouTube show as well. In the show itself, the first day, the participants were split into introvert room and extrovert room. So that was something that was really entertaining to watch, because you could see a stark difference when the first introvert entered the room and then the first extrovert enters the room. Gradually more people comes in, and you see that in the introvert room, people are talking, but it's definitely more toned down, whereas in the extrovert room, people are coming in and saying hi. It looks as though they already know each other, but actually it's the first time everyone met. So that's a very clear difference between the two different personality types, but I guess that's also the first view that you get of them. And I think in the subsequent letters, you actually realize that although introvert and extrovert seems to be the main category, but there are actually other things that affects their personality type. So I'll actually move on to the next letter. The second category is sensing versus intuitive. The general description for people who are sensory as are realistic people who like to focus on facts, details, and they like to see things that are around them and understand from that. They use their senses, past experiences to come up with practical solution to problem. For intuitive people, they prefer to focus on the possibility of what could happen, the big pictures. They would like to see patterns and value innovations, and will try to seek creative solutions to problems. Between these two letters, I think what people would say is intuitive people might be sort of like a dreamer. They are not as realistic, and they would like to think of possibilities of things that could happen. Whereas sensory people are more logical, in the sense where they only use things that they can see and perceive, so they are very realistic and they don't like to visualize stuff as much. So personally, I'm an intuitive. So that's letter N. And I do think that that's quite true about myself, because as much as I like to see facts around me, but ultimately I often would imagine what if something happens. For example, if I was going out a day to the supermarket, I might think, or what if I see a cat along the way? What if I see something like a big sale for something happening? Just things that I'm not sure that it will happen, but I could imagine, what if something is happening? That's sort of like a practical example, but I think there's a lot of cases where I would think further than I have to. So I actually would like to imagine, okay, what if my future career is something different? I don't usually base things based just exactly how I see it. I try to see it further from where it is. So I think that I don't really have that much to talk about in this category, just because I don't think it's something that is as dominant in the 4 letters for myself. But I do see that it's something that sort of differentiates how I make my decision. So I would view things in the possibility that it could be, rather than what it actually has to be. And just going through an example on the show itself also, I think one difference was people who are sensory in that show, they had a task where they need to build a Christmas tree. So the people in the room of the sensory groups, they were looking around for instruction manuals and seeing if there were things that they can refer to before they start building the tree. Whereas the intuitive people just started building the trees as it goes, and it's sort of they weren't restricted by the things that were around them, and they were more creative in that sense. So that was something that I could relate to, just because when let's say I'm doing a certain project, I do like to see what's the possibility of this thing coming out instead of just following exactly how it is. So that was something interesting to know, although not as impactful as I imagine it to be. So let's move on to the next letter. The next letters is thinkers versus feelers. So thinking versus feeling. For people who are in the thinking space, they tend to make decisions using logical analysis. They would objectively weigh the pros and cons, and they really value consistency and fairness. Whereas people in the feeling space tend to be more sensitive, try to be more cooperative, and they make decisions based on their own personal values and how other people will be affected by their actions or the words that they have. So between these two letters, personally, I'm a feeling, so a F, and I would agree with that because despite being someone who is logical, but I make decisions ultimately based on my feeling. So I would care more about the people around me instead of making a decision that is logically correct. I do see that there's pros and cons between each of them, and I understand when there's conflict because they are quite a different way of reacting to people. And you could see this example really clearly when you watch the show, the MBTI show on YouTube. So on the third day of the show, they split the participants in the thinking room and the feeling room. And that day was an interesting episode just because both groups of participants were really happy being in their group of thinkers and groups of feelers. The people in the thinking room felt that they had a comforting space where they could talk about things without worrying that they would hurt someone's feeling, and they could logically debate about stuff, talk about things that they wanted to go through. Whereas the people in the feelings room felt very comforted that day because the people around them were people who could understand how they feel, and everyone was trying to understand each other's feeling, and there was no tension between each of them in the sense that someone would say something that hurts some other people's feeling. And I think one very good example in the show itself is when one of the feeler was doing dishes in the room and were asking for help, the rest of the feelers all gathered in the kitchen to help out. It was quite a funny scene because they all bundled together in one corner of the house. I think in the similar situation, if it was in the thinker's room, likely this wouldn't happen because my perspective is if someone is asking for help, I think the thinkers, maybe one of them would help out instead of everyone because they will see that, oh, the kitchen is not a big space. We don't need everyone to join in to help out. So I think that was something that's interesting to see. And I would say that this category is actually one of the more dominant one, just because you see how the different participants were affected emotionally and logically as well when they had that overlap again after being in separate teams. When the participants were having dinner, so it was still categorized between the feelers and the thinkers. I think one of the thinkers, or like a couple of them, went to the feelers room, and you could see immediately the conversation was a little bit awkward. The feelers were being silent because they didn't feel comfortable when the thinkers came in, and the thinkers were being a little bit crude when they talk about things. So you could see that both team wasn't very comfortable, and shortly after, the thinkers actually left the room. So I think it's an interesting thing to see. There's honestly no right and wrong in this. It's just the way people perceive emotions. And I think an interesting thing to know is also in the show itself, they were saying that most of the thinkers actually could count the number of times they have cried in their lifetime. Whereas the feelers were saying that they have no idea how many times they have cried. So it's a peculiar thing to hear about, because I think most people don't realize that there's the other spectrum. But I do think that this may not be like a hard, you are a thinker, you are a feeler. You could be in between as well. But when someone is dominantly in one, you could really see a big difference in the two categories. So let's move on to the last category. The last letters are judging versus perceiving. So J versus P. People who are in the judging space tend to be more organized and prepared, and they like to make and stick to plans, and they're generally comfortable following most rules, and they like to complete projects. Whereas people in the perceiving space prefer to keep their options more open. They like to act spontaneously or impromptus, and they're generally flexible with making plans. They don't have a strict timetable that they follow, or like a strict system that they follow. So for this category, personally, I'm a J, so judging. And I see that that's quite a dominant factor about myself, especially in my own lifestyle. I think over the years, I have always kept records of details about my life, such as a planner, and I keep track of my expenses as well. And that's something that has been part of me for a really long time. I have friends who are in the J space and also in the P space, and I see that it's something that's quite clear. I think when you interact with your friends, most of the time you could guess which category they sort of belong under, or something that they are slightly closer to. And I think it's something that is quite important to me, in the sense that for me personally, I do enjoy making plans, and if there's no plans being made, I would feel uncomfortable. But at the same time, I'm also not someone who is too rigid about my plan, because I understand that things would happen, things would change. So I am comfortable with having a plan that could change over time. So I think this category in the MBTI show itself has very interesting interaction between the participants, because you could notice them and it's very clear, like the small things that happens. So in this room, I think the activity that I have, spoiler alert for the whole show, although I should have given that earlier, but basically one activity they did is that they had to plan out a timetable of what they would do for the last day at the accommodation. So the people in the J room plan out the itinerary based on the final event activity, which is to have dinner at 5 p.m. So what they did is they work backwards. They need some time to prepare the food. They need time to clean up the food after eating the food. So they made plans according to that, and they also slotted in activities such as Q&A, rest time, break time, snack time, those events. In contrast, the people in the perceiving room had no plans. The only thing they had was free time for about 5 hours, and a block of time that says the dinner, so an hour time for dinner. And I think this outright shows a very, very clear difference between how the two groups make plans and do things in general. So I would say that I'm definitely in the J group, because I would not be able to do a planning that is 5 hours of free time, because I would not know what to do in that 5 hours without planning something. It could be planning to take a nap or planning to do something, but there has to be something instead of just free time. So, and that was something that was definitely not me. And the thing in the show is that the producer actually had a mission for them, where after they did that plan out, they swapped the plan. So what happened is the people in the J room has to go for the 5 hours of free time and 1 hour of dinner time, while the people in the P room had to follow the itinerary that the J people had done. So I think that was a really, really smart move that the producer did, because you show how they act differently and how do they deal with trying to get used to another system that they are not used to. So I think the people in the J room, some of them had really big reactions. They were saying like, oh, we only have 1 hour to have dinner, to cook dinner, and to finish cleaning up the dishes. And what do we do in the 5 hours of free time? A lot of them were like, oh, we can't do that. We need to have time. We need to allocate time. Whether this is a snack time, this is a nap time, is this dinner time, things have to be listed out so that at least they know what has to be done between that category of time. Whereas the P people were like, oh no, we have to follow a plan now. But what they did is they say, oh, maybe we could have some flexibility. It doesn't have to be exactly this timing. We could do something else. Even though they had a plan that they had to follow, but the way they reacted was different. So that was interesting to know. But I think another element that came through during the show was how they organize their space. So they stayed in like rooms together in accommodation. So it was the last day and they had to pack up to leave the place. So the last mission that they had by the producer was to clean up the place. The people who in the P space were saying, do we need to clean up? Isn't it clean enough? Whereas the people in the J took the mission very seriously. They were mopping the floor, cleaning everything, collecting the towels. While the P people were sort of slacking off, sitting on one side, not trying to do anything. It's interesting to see, just because I think they are motivated by different things ultimately. Another aspect that was very, very clear is when it comes to packing. A few of them had interaction talking to each other. So the people in the P room, some were asking, how's your packing? And one of the person who I think is INTP was saying that he hasn't packed yet, but he could finish packing in 1 minute. Whereas another girl, I think was another letter P as well, was saying that, oh, she will just stuff everything in the bag and that will be fine. So it was shocking personally, because I will not be able to do that. Whereas I think another J in the team was saying that he's actually already packed and ready to go, and I really related to him. So actually my personality type with that participant was the same. So I think at this point you know that my personality is INFJ, and that is the same as the person who said they have already packed and are ready to go. So personally, I think that's true for myself, because I would pack in advance and I will usually be ready to go by the last day. So it was interesting to hear how it's not just me, but there are other people in the same personality trait that has similar behavior as well. So I think that's covers all the letters that we have to go through, and also some examples from the show that I found really interesting and noteworthy stuff. So I think moving next, we'll talk a little bit more about how this personality test actually affects people, and is it actually valid? Now that we have gone through the 4 different categories, let's go back to see the whole thing as a collective. So based on the 4 different categories and the different letters each of them, you actually come up with 16 personality types. And I think if you have not done the test before, you can actually go to, I think, 16 personalities. It's a website, and you actually can do a quick free personality test, and it will show up the different personality that you have, and you can read through to see the description that they have come up with, and to see if that's something that you relate to. It may or may not be accurate, but I think to some extent it's quite accurate. They actually split them into groups of 4. So there's the analysts, there is the diplomats, and then there's the sentients, as well as the explorers. So all the 16 personality is split into these categories. And the thing that is probably the most controversial for this personality type is that a lot of people were saying that because it's a self-report, it's actually not as accurate, and it's very hard to get the exact same result over a multiple period of time, just because this test itself, you are not actually doing it in the best experimental questionnaire form, just because self-reports has a lot of bias. And if you read a lot about a certain personality type, you sort of know what answers to put in. So people are saying that, the test is not accurate and all. In all honesty, I take it as more of like a fun thing to look through. It's in fact closer to like a horoscope than actually a personality type, but it's something that is interesting to know. So I found it interesting to just look through and discuss with friends, just because you actually do see that the friends around you, they do have some commonality between the different categories. Just so that like, oh, maybe my friend is an ENFJ, so I get along with her since I'm an INFJ. Or maybe an INFP also get along with me because the only difference is one letter. So these are things that I think just taking with a pinch of salt is sufficient. Not to take it too seriously. It's just all fun, because ultimately it's not possible to split all the population into 16 unique personality groups, because ultimately within each groups you don't see that people are exactly the same. Me as an INFJ, I could meet another INFJ who is completely different, even though we get the same test result. So that's something that people who are taking this test should just take note of. It's not final. It's not that if someone is an opposite letter as you and you can't get along with them. For example, if because I'm INFJ, so supposedly I'm not supposed to get used to people who are ESTP, but honestly that's not the final, because it's a scale. You could be maybe just 50% of each of them, so you're actually not like a big number across them. I think for me, the only thing that is probably like consistent is just because I have taken this test periodically every couple of maybe 2 years, just to see if my result has changed, and so far I've always been getting the same result. And in fact, some of the time I'm actually getting a higher percentage of each of the category. But ultimately I think that this personality test really depends on your stage of life. Maybe at this point in time you don't have to be so extroverted, so you could be more introverted, and maybe even your job responsibility, if you are required to do a lot of planning, you might actually move from a P to a J. Whereas if you don't have to be so organized and so planned out, and you're more of like a free to go person, you might actually be more of a P. And honestly, I think all this changes based on your personality, and as time goes by, your experiences affect how you would act in different situations. So I think it's definitely a good sort of gauge just to see roughly what type of personality types you are, and you could just read through for fun and see anything that might be interesting. What's your weakness, what's your strength, is there anything that you can improve on? But I think just like horoscope, don't take it too seriously. Just, it could be a conversation, but not something that you should consider as your goal or your ultimate goal to follow. But I think there is still some validity in it, in the sense that this test itself is actually a simplified version of a bigger research done by Carl Jung. It's written quite a long time ago, and Carl Jung actually proposed that there are 4 main functions of consciousness. A lot of them actually overlaps with MBTI, just that he's not giving like a 16 personality types. So those are things that has overlaps with the MBTI. So there are some stuff that is still valid, just that maybe it's not 16, maybe there could be more, maybe it's a bit restricting that there's only 16. So maybe just talking a little bit more about my own personality type. So I've mentioned that I'm an INFJ. So based on MBTI, that means I'm an advocate. So someone who has introverted, intuitive, feeling, and judging personality type. So based on the 16 personality website, my personality advocate tend to approach life with deep thoughtfulness and imagination. And one catchphrase they were saying is that we like to treat people as if what they ought to be, and you help to them to become what they are capable of being. That's something that I feel that I could relate to. And they were saying that INFJs is called sort of like the rarest personality types of all. But honestly, I think it's only true for male INFJ, because it's not common to have a male INFJ in general. It's a little bit more common for female INFJ, based on some of the articles that I've read. So generally, people in INFJ seek purpose in their life. They don't really care about having social growth. They really want to understand people. And we care a lot about other people's life, making their life better, and connecting with people, having a few close relationships. So I mainly just reading out things that I thought is relevant to me. Of course, there are things that may or may not be as strong. But I think that's what I've mentioned in the previous section, where there is some cognition bias when it comes to doing the quiz, because you don't know how you perceive yourself. Is that the correct version? You probably are beautifying yourself, or maybe you're biased a bit towards the way you are, so you may not give a 100% accurate review of your own personality. But I think more or less, looking at the strengths, the weaknesses, the overview of INFJ, I think more or less I relate to it. Some strengths of INFJ are creative, insightful, principled, passionate, altruistic. I think between this few, I would say that I agree about creative, not in the sense that I don't think that I'm a very creative person, but I enjoy being in activities that are more creative. I like to have opportunity where I can do different things, such as this podcast that I'm doing, get opportunity to try out different stuff. It's just something that I'm drawn towards. And talking about the weaknesses for INFJs are sensitive to criticism, reluctant to open up, perfectionist, avoiding the ordinary, prone to burnout. So I think between these, there are two that I feel strongly about. Perfectionist. But as a perfectionist, I think a lot of people that are also perfectionists would have probably the same saying, is that when you're a perfectionist, you either get it done really well, or if you know you can't get it done well, you actually don't do anything about it, and you end up procrastinating. So that is one of a big weakness that I have. And the other thing is prone to burnout, which ties in with the perfectionist. Because I want to get something done perfectly, I would spend a lot of time on it and a lot of energy, to the point where I probably exhaust myself and I don't balance it out enough without getting sufficient rest, and that creates a lot of burnout. And I think that's not limited to INFJs, but I think it is a valid weakness that I do notice myself having. And I think if you know me, I'm not someone who likes to talk about my personal life. So even doing this podcast, I think I'm talking a lot more about myself, but I ultimately I will still withhold information, just because I am not comfortable talking about personal stuff to people that I'm not close to or used to yet. So I think those are the key strengths and weaknesses. Interesting thing is people who are related to me, in the sense of people in the INFJ personality types. There are a couple. So there is Martin Luther, Nelson Mandela, Mother Teresa, Marie Kondo, Lady Gaga, Morgan Freeman, Jon Snow, just to name a couple. So there's quite a few people that are in the INFJ space, and there are some traits that overlaps between them. So yep, that's more or less my personality type. To conclude, I think bulk of the reason for this episode is really because I had a great time watching the show on YouTube, the MBTI by Mission Possible. I actually introduced my friend to that show quite late at night, I think 12, and I think she went to binge watch the whole show until 2:30 a.m. because it's quite a simple show to watch and it's very fun to see the interaction. Also because I always wanted to see a case, like a social experiment, where you see the 16 personality brought together, because it's not something that you actually get to see regularly, and you don't actually know the people around you what personality types they are, because not everyone knows about MBTI and not everyone has taken the test. But getting to see that, that idea that I have, or maybe you can have them in a room, and that actually being an actual variety show, was really fun to watch. So actually, I have an idea where I could actually bring guests on this podcast, just look with different personalities and see what differentiate me versus them and what is unique about that personality. Because I think ultimately in this episode, the bulk that I can talk about is really my own personality type, because I don't really know that much about the other individual personality. And if I had a chance, I would definitely love to invite guests for the different personality, the remaining 15 personalities, to join this and just have a chat about what is out there. So if you're listening to this and you are interested to join in one of the episodes, do let me know. And yeah, that's the end of today's episode. And just to close off, that's all for today. Be yourself and take care.